130,000 pesos. That's what an 18-year-old found sitting in his inbox. An email from a lending app, his mom's outstanding balance. His family earns good money, they don't live large. And still, every single month, the last 2 weeks look like a financial emergency. There is an explanation here, but it's not the explanation most people expect. Hey Profiteer, Eric here. Welcome back to Real Money Stories. Today's episode comes from the Poverty Finance subreddit, and it's about something that trips up families at every income level. What happens when the numbers should work, but somehow they never do? This one comes from a young man in the Philippines, 18 years old, watching his family's finances fall apart despite a solid income. Nearly 400 upvotes and over 200 comments. The response in that thread tells you how many people recognize this pattern. Let me read it to you in their own words. Hello, I'm an 18-year-old male, and I just want to share something that's been bothering me for a while. To start, my dad earns around $3,000 to $6,000 per month. Converted to Philippine pesos, that's a significant amount of money. However, over the past year, I've noticed that my mom has been taking out loans from lending apps. I found out because she's been using my email address when filling out the applications. She usually borrows around 10,000 to 30,000 pesos every month. One day, I received an email saying she had an outstanding balance of 130,000 pesos. When I saw that, my heart dropped. What I don't understand is why my mom still needs to borrow money when my dad earns that much. Every month after my dad gets paid, we seem to have enough money for the first 2 weeks. Then, during the last 2 weeks of the month, we're suddenly out of money, and my mom takes out another loan. We don't live a lavish lifestyle, we rarely go out, and we don't spend much on unnecessary things. That's why I'm so confused about where all the money is going. I haven't talked to my mom about it yet because I don't know how to bring it up without sounding accusatory. Even my dad has started to become suspicious about where the money is going. Has anyone experienced something similar, either personally or with a family member? What could explain a situation like this? I know there could be reasons I'm unaware of, and I don't want to jump to conclusions. I'm just worried and would appreciate any advice on how to approach this conversation with my mom. Okay. First thing I want to say reading this is this kid is being extraordinarily thoughtful. He finds out his mom is carrying serious loan debt in his own inbox, his dad is getting suspicious, and his first instinct isn't to blow things up. He wants answers, not accusations. That instinct is actually mature, and it's going to serve him well in what comes next. I've been writing about personal finance for over a decade, and the pattern I keep seeing in situations like this, where a family earns what should be enough but stays broke every month, almost always comes down to one of three things. And the most important one is almost never the thing people assume first. We'll cover all three. Just a friendly reminder that this episode is for entertainment and education only and should not be considered financial or legal advice. For your specific situation, talk to a qualified financial advisor, and in a case like this one, a family counselor is worth bringing in. All right, let's talk about what's actually going on here and what this 18-year-old might do about it. Start with the pattern that the original poster describes. Strong money the first 2 weeks, then nothing. Every single month, there's a name for this in personal finance, the feast-famine cycle, and here's what makes it dangerous. It doesn't care how much you earn. It only cares about the relationship between when money comes in and when obligations go out. Here's the mechanism. Money arrives, bills get paid, groceries are bought. For the first 2 weeks, there's breathing room, then the next round of expenses hits, and there's not quite enough left. A loan fills the gap. Next month, you're paying back last month's loan before the new month even starts, which means the comfortable window shrinks a little. The cycle tightens, and the outstanding balance climbs, just like the original poster described, from one small loan to 130,000 pesos sitting in an inbox. That's the first piece of the puzzle. The lending app cycle itself has become a budget problem. Even if there were no other mystery spending, borrowing at high interest every month is pulling money out of next month's budget. The math always gets worse, never better until something breaks the cycle. Now here's where it gets complicated. The loan cycle explains the mechanics, but it doesn't explain the origin. Something started this. There was a first shortfall before the first loan, and whatever caused it is probably still happening. The money is going somewhere, and the original poster is right to ask. In my experience covering these situations, there are three explanations worth considering, and I'd weight them in a specific order. The first, and honestly the most common in Filipino households in particular, is what I'd call the hidden obligation pattern. In the Philippines and across much of Southeast Asia, it's culturally normal and sometimes expected for a working family to support extended relatives. Parents who need help, a sibling going through a hard stretch, a cousin who can't make rent. This isn't irresponsible spending. It's family. But it's also a significant financial commitment that, if it isn't part of the shared household budget, becomes invisible. One person knows about it, the other doesn't. And the one who doesn't can't understand why the money keeps disappearing. If this is what's happening, mom isn't doing anything wrong in the moral sense. She's managing a family obligation she hasn't known how to name. The issue isn't character, it's communication. And that's actually fixable. The second possibility is earlier debt. Sometimes the lending apps weren't the beginning. Maybe there was a medical expense, an emergency, a business loss that happened before anyone noticed, and the loans came later as a way to keep managing the fallout. In that case, the 130,000 pesos is a symptom, not the root cause. There's something older underneath it. Third, and I'll name it directly because skipping it would be incomplete, sometimes there's spending that one spouse keeps private from the other. This can range from small things that are simply hard to admit all the way into more serious situations. The original poster says the family doesn't spend on unnecessary things and doesn't live large, and I take that at face value. But a full household budget review would surface anything hidden. So what should this 18-year-old actually do? Here's how I'd think about it. First, the conversation has to happen, and it has to be framed as concern, not accusation. There's a technique I'd call the soft financial check-in. You don't lead with, I know about the loans. You lead with something closer to, I've been thinking about how our household budget works, and I want to understand it better. Curiosity, not confrontation. The goal of the first conversation is just to open the door. Second, this probably needs to eventually become a conversation between the parents, not just the original poster and mom. Dad is already suspicious. That suspicion is going to surface one way or another. Better that it comes out in a calm, structured setting than in an argument late at night when another collection email arrives. A family money meeting where everyone sits down with the actual numbers, income on one side, and all obligations on the other, is the healthiest way to get everyone on the same page. Third, if they do that budget review, I'd strongly recommend zero-based budgeting. The idea is simple. Every peso gets assigned a job before the month starts. Fixed expenses first, variable spending second, savings third, and what's left is truly discretionary. This approach forces every obligation into the open. You can't hide a 30,000 peso monthly loan repayment in a zero-based budget because there's no unnamed pile of money to absorb it. Everything has to be named. Fourth, the lending apps need to stop. Even before the full debt is resolved, each new loan adds interest to next month's burden, making the shortfall worse by a little bit each cycle. The debt avalanche method, putting any extra payments toward the highest interest debt first while making minimum payments on the rest, is the standard framework for climbing out. But you can't start the avalanche while you're still piling new snow on the top. The first move is a hard stop on new borrowing. Now, I know just stop taking loans sounds obvious. It's not that simple. If there's a genuine monthly shortfall, stopping the loans without a plan just means something else doesn't get paid. So the stopping has to happen at the same time as the household rebuilds its budget with everyone at the table and the real numbers in front of them. That's exactly why the conversation comes first. One more thing worth saying. The original poster, is worried about sounding accusatory, and that instinct is exactly right. Financial secrets in families almost never come from bad intentions. They come from shame, from wanting to protect people, from not knowing the words for, I'm in over my head. Mom may be carrying something overwhelming on her own because she doesn't know how to ask for help. The conversation that would actually help her is not, where did the money go? It's, I see you're carrying something heavy. Let's figure it out together. The specific post today was about a family in the Philippines, a dad earning good money, a mom with 130,000 pesos in lending app debt, and a teenage son trying to make sense of it all. But the principle underneath it applies anywhere. Income level is not a guarantee of financial stability. What you earn matters far less than what you've committed to spending, what's going unsaid in the budget, and whether the people who share a household actually share the numbers. The feast-famine cycle can happen at any income. The fix is always the same. full transparency, a zero-based budget, and a plan to break the loan cycle before the interest makes it unbreakable. If you found this helpful, share it with someone dealing with the same thing. Until next time, stay profitable. $400,000 inherited, never touched it. 7 years later, it's grown to 900,000, and mom says it's time for a house. The math disagrees. This one's going to surprise you. Hey Profiteer, Eric here. Welcome back to Real Money Stories. Today's episode comes from the Personal Finance subreddit, and it's one of the most genuinely interesting rent versus buy dilemmas I've come across in a long time. This one comes from the Personal Finance subreddit. The title is simply, "Is it smarter to keep renting?" Let me read it to you in their own words. I'm in what I believe is a pretty unique situation. About 7 years ago, I inherited approximately $400,000. I never touched it, and today it has reached $900,000. I work in a restaurant and don't make a ton of money, but my bills are paid. Rent is $2,000 a month, no debt, no kids, no other expenses. There is rent stabilization here, so it can't be raised more than 6% per lease, and I sign 2-year leases. I max out my Roth IRA every year, but I don't save any money outside of that. My mom thinks I should buy a home, but one-bedroom condos in my area range from $400 to $600K. I think keeping the inherited money invested and untouched will, long-term, make me more money than not paying rent would save me. I feel like everyone's goal is to own property, but I just don't think it makes sense in my situation. Any advice about why I may be wrong would be appreciated. Okay, first thing I want to say, reading this to the original poster is asking exactly the right question. Not validate me, not prove my mom wrong, but genuinely show me where I might be off. That's intellectual honesty, and it matters a great deal when you're staring down a decision this large. And I'll be upfront, reading this, my gut reaction was that their instincts are pretty sound. Let me walk through why, and then I'll flag the one thing they're probably underestimating. I've been writing about personal finance for over a decade, and the assumption that comes up constantly in comment sections, in family dinner conversations, at every holiday table, is that owning is always smarter than renting. It's one of the most persistent myths in this space. It isn't universally true. It depends entirely on the math of your specific situation. And in this situation, the math is pretty vocal. Here's the first framework I'd reach for. It's called the price to rent ratio. Simple concept, take the purchase price of a home and divide it by the annual rent you'd pay for something comparable. The result tells you whether a given market tilts toward buyers or renters. Below 15, buying tends to win. Between 15 and 20, you're in judgment, call territory, and your personal circumstances start doing most of the deciding. Above 20, renting typically makes more financial sense, and here's why. At that ratio, the capital you'd tie up in the home would generate more wealth if it stayed invested than the avoided rent payments would save you. Let's run the numbers for the original poster. $2,000 a month in rent is $24,000 a year. Condos in their area run $400,000 to $600,000. Call it $500,000 at the midpoint. 500,000 divided by 20, 4,000 is about 20.8. That puts them squarely in the zone where renting is probably the stronger financial move. And that's before we even factor into the rent stabilization, which I'll get to in a moment. The second framework is the total cost of home ownership. This is where a lot of people get genuinely surprised because the mortgage is only part of it. On a $500,000 condo, financed with 20% down at current rates, the monthly principal and interest payment alone is somewhere around $2,600. But then there's property taxes. On a condo at that price point, depending on the state, that could be $500 to $600 a month. HOA fees on a condo can run anywhere from $400 to $800 a month or higher. Homeowners insurance and a maintenance reserve. The standard rule of thumb is to budget 1% of the home's value per year for upkeep. On a $500,000 property, that's $5,000 a year, or roughly $400 a month sitting in a reserve account. Add all that up and you're probably looking at a total monthly cost of ownership somewhere north of $4,000. Against $2,000 in stabilized rent, that's a gap of $2,000 a month. $24,000 a year that stays in their pocket or goes back into the portfolio if they stay where they are, which leads directly to framework 3, the opportunity cost of capital. Here's the core idea, and the mechanism matters. Money that isn't working for you is working against you because it's not growing. $400,000 compounded to $900,000 in 7 years. That's roughly a 12% annualized return, which is above the long run average, so let's be conservative going forward. At 7% annually, $900,000 becomes around $3.5 million in 20 years. That's the compounding engine we're talking about disrupting. Now, here's where it gets complicated. The original poster says they want to keep the money invested and untouched. Great plan, but what happens if 5 or 10 years from now they change their mind? Life does that. A partner enters the picture. A city becomes unaffordable. Circumstances shift. Here's the wrinkle most people miss. Their inherited portfolio has what's called a stepped-up cost basis. That means, for tax purposes, their cost basis was set at the approximate value of the portfolio on the day they inherited it, around $400,000. The portfolio is now worth $900,000. That's $500,000 in unrealized capital gains. If they liquidate enough holdings to buy a $500,000 condo outright, they could be looking at a federal capital gains tax bill of $75,000 or more before state taxes. Not a reason to never buy, but a very real cost that nearly every just buy a house recommendation ignores. Knowing this now means they can plan ahead and structure a purchase that doesn't trigger a giant, avoidable tax event. Just a friendly reminder that this episode is intended for entertainment and education purposes only and should not be considered financial or legal advice. Given the tax complexity here especially, please talk to a qualified financial advisor and a CPA about your specific situation before making any moves. Now let me highlight something that the original poster almost buried in their post, like they didn't fully realize how valuable it is. The rent stabilization. A 6% cap with 2-year lease terms is a form of housing cost predictability that most renters in this country simply do not have. And here's the thing about owning a condo that often gets glossed over: property taxes can go up. HOA fees can rise. Special assessments arrive without warning. A $15,000 roof repair. A structural issue in the building. A major plumbing job. Those costs land entirely on the owner with no cap and no 2-year buffer. The original poster has locked in predictable, protected housing costs. That's real. That is dollar value. Don't underestimate it. One thing I do want to flag gently, because it's worth a moment of attention. They mention they don't save any money outside of the Roth IRA. Given the size of the portfolio, that's probably fine in the broad sense. But the 3 to 6 month emergency fund rule still applies, even for people with substantial assets. The distinction that matters: if an emergency forces them to sell taxable investments at a bad market moment, that's a painful situation, and it also triggers a taxable event. Make sure there's actual liquid cash sitting somewhere accessible, not just portfolio value on a screen. The Roth IRA piece, that takes real discipline on a restaurant income. And having that tax-free growth bucket sitting alongside a taxable portfolio is genuinely smart long-term tax diversification. That part needs no adjustment. So, to answer the original poster's question directly, I don't think they're wrong. The price to rent ratio leans toward renting. The total cost of ownership would run them significantly more per month than their current rent. The portfolio is compounding at a rate that's historically hard for residential real estate to match over a 20 or 30-year horizon. And they have a rent stabilization arrangement that most renters would genuinely envy. The advice I'd give is stay the course, but get organized. Understand the tax situation on that portfolio before you make any moves. Keep accessible liquid cash for emergencies. And if the buy question ever comes back around, talk to a CPA first. The specific situation here is $900,000, $2,000-odd stabilized rent, and condos at $500,000. But the principle stretches well beyond those numbers. Rent versus buy is not a values question. It's not about what you're supposed to want or what everyone around the dinner table expects from you. It's a math problem. Your price to rent ratio, your total cost of ownership, your opportunity cost, your tax picture. Those are the inputs that matter. Run the numbers, not the assumptions. If you found this helpful, share it with someone dealing with the same thing. Until next time, stay profitable. Has $900 to his name. September 3rd to find a new home. His family's entire housing budget, $925 a month. They're in Orange County, California, where that won't cover a parking space. His dad earns $140,000 a year. This one's going to surprise you. Hey Profiteer, Eric here. Welcome back to Real Money Stories. Today we've got a housing crisis from the Poverty Finance subreddit with a hard deadline, a complicated family situation, and a lot more paths forward than the original poster currently sees. This comes from the Poverty Finance subreddit. The original poster is 23 years old, and he's lived his whole life in Yorba Linda, California. Let me read it to you in their own words. I'm a 23-year-old that's fully dependent on my parents still, and I have no car, no driver's license. I got my learner's permit in March and have been taking driving lessons though. No friends, only $900 to my name, and no degree or work certificate. I've lived in Yorba Linda, CA for my entire life. We've just been served a non-fault eviction by the owner of our current place today and must move out by September 3rd. The problem isn't that my family doesn't have money for groceries and other basic essentials. It's that we don't have any money for housing, as my dad has a 510 credit score with a 2022 eviction on it. My mom, who has a 785 credit score, has an annual income of $34,000, and my annual income is $0. My dad's annual income is $140,000, and he pays $4,250 a month in rent for a place in the Bay Area. My 34-year-old brother and his girlfriend live with him rent-free. With my mom's annual income, all we can afford is a place to rent for $925 a month or less. That won't even get you a couch here in Yorba Linda, so moving out of the state entirely will be mandatory. We also don't have time to visit places and see which ones we prefer and all that. We need to find a place ASAP and just move there. Any suggestions on where we should move? Unfortunately, I highly doubt that we'll be able to find a 2-bedroom place anywhere. I'll have to sleep on the couch until my 30s. I'm guessing that states like Oklahoma, Arkansas, Iowa, and Ohio are our only options. Also, I plan to start pursuing a career in HVAC soon, so let me know if that should impact where we decide to move as well. Okay, first thing I want to say, reading this, the stress in this post is real. September 3rd is not a distant deadline. Being 23, no income, no car, no degree, facing an eviction notice alongside your mom in one of the most expensive counties in the country. That is a heavy situation, and none of it deserves to be minimized. I've been writing about personal finance for over a decade, and the pattern I keep seeing in housing crises like this one is that people in the middle of them spot one problem when they actually face two. There's the immediate problem, where do we live by September 3rd? And there's the structural problem, how do we change the income picture in the next 12 months? Both of those have real paths forward, and sometimes the second question's answer tells you exactly where to go for the first. Let me walk through what I'd probably do in their shoes. First, the math. There's a long-standing benchmark in personal finance called the 30% housing rule. The idea is that your rent shouldn't push past 30% of your gross monthly income. Mom earns $34,000 a year. That's about $2,833 a month before taxes. 30% of that is roughly $850. So $925 a month is already just slightly beyond what most financial planners would call the safe zone, and it leaves almost no cushion for anything going sideways. That same math explains why Yorba Linda is simply off the table. Median one-bedroom rent in Orange County runs $2,200 to $2,500. There's no budgeting trick that closes a gap that wide. The original poster has already landed on the right conclusion. Out of state is the move. The only real question is which state. The original poster mentions Oklahoma, Arkansas, Iowa, and Ohio. All four are legitimate on price. In Tulsa, you can find a solid one-bedroom for $700 to $900. Columbus, Ohio is in that same range. Smaller markets in Arkansas and Iowa run even cheaper. The direction is right. But here's where it gets complicated. Right at the end of the post, the original poster says he plans to pursue a career in HVAC. That one sentence changes everything about this location decision. Not slightly, completely. There's a framework I'd call the career cost overlap, and for this family, it should be the primary filter for where they land. You don't just want to move somewhere cheap. You want to move somewhere cheap that also has strong demand for the career you're building. And here's why that distinction matters so much. The same city can be cheap with no jobs, or cheap with real opportunity, and those are completely different situations for someone just beginning a career. HVAC right now is a genuinely strong field to be entering. The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects about 9% job growth for HVAC technicians over the next decade. Median annual pay sits around $57,000 nationally. Experienced technicians in busy markets can clear $80,000 or more. Most certificate programs take 6 to 18 months at a community college. No 4-year degree required, no 6-figure student loan. Real in-demand trade work with a clear earning trajectory. So where do affordable rent and strong HVAC demand actually overlap? Texas is the biggest answer. Not Austin, which is priced up considerably, but mid-sized markets like San Antonio, Fort Worth, or Lubbock. One-bedroom rents in those cities run $700 to $1,000. Texas has no state income tax, one of the largest concentrations of HHVA jobs in the country, and a hot climate that means year-round air conditioning demand. That last part matters more than people expect. In a colder northern state, HVAC work can slow down or go seasonal in the off months. In Texas, the AC runs 9 months out of the year. That's consistent, steady work for a technician who's just getting started. Florida is a strong second option. Orlando, Jacksonville, the Tampa suburbs, hot climate, constant cooling demand, and one-bedroom rents in the $900 to $1,100 range in the right neighborhoods. It's right at the top edge of what they can afford. But it's workable, especially if the original poster starts earning within the first year. Ohio and the Midwest still belong on the list. Columbus has a real job market and low rents for a city its size. Oklahoma City tends to get overlooked compared to the Sun Belt, but it's a solid pick on both counts. Now here's something I think that the original poster is underestimating, and it really matters. Mom has a 785 credit score. That is an excellent number. In most mid-tier rental markets outside of California, a 785 opens real doors. Most landlords are genuinely happy renting to someone with that score. Dad's 510 and his 2022 eviction, completely irrelevant if he's not on the lease. From the post, Dad is fully separate in the Bay Area. He does not need to appear on this application. Mom applies on her own with her 785, and suddenly the application looks a lot more manageable than the original poster is imagining. The income to rent ratio is the real qualifying benchmark. Most landlords want to see gross income that's at least 3 times the monthly rent. On $34,000 a year, that's about $2,833 a month gross. 3 times $925 is $2,775. So they're right on the line. The practical solution focuses on private landlords rather than large property management companies. Corporate property managers run applications through an automated system. You qualify or you don't, and there's no room for negotiation. Private landlords, people listing on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist in the target city, are far more open to an actual conversation. Offering a slightly larger security deposit upfront can also help offset any income concern. Don't wait until after picking a city to start searching. Run listings in 2 or 3 target cities at the same time and let the actual availability help shape the decision. One more option worth knowing: Section 8 housing choice vouchers. Full transparency here, waitlists in most markets are long, sometimes years long. This is not going to solve the September 3rd problem, but if they're starting fresh in a new city, getting on the local voucher waitlist the day they arrive costs nothing and could be meaningful support further down the road. Worth doing on day one. And just a friendly reminder, this episode is for entertainment and education purposes only and should not be considered financial or legal advice. For your specific situation, talk to a qualified financial advisor or housing counselor who can look at your full picture. One last thing, and I'll say it plainly, that the original poster's dad earns $140,000 a year. His 34-year-old brother lives with him rent free. His mom and his 23-year-old son are facing a September eviction with $900 between them. I'm not here to judge anyone's family dynamics. There's clearly a history I can't know from a Reddit post. But the original poster should, at minimum, have a direct and honest conversation with his dad about whether any short-term support is possible. A loan, help with moving costs, a security deposit. A few $1,000s at this exact moment could be the difference between landing somewhere stable and landing in a genuine crisis. Worth asking directly. The most important long-term move here is getting the HVAC training started as soon as they land somewhere new. If the original poster is enrolled by October, he could have a certificate and real earning power inside 12 months. At $57,000 a year, the whole picture changes. Mom stops carrying the entire financial weight alone. A two-bedroom stops being a fantasy. Sleeping on the couch stops being the plan. The specific question here was about $925 a month and a September 3rd deadline in one of the most expensive states in the country. But the bigger principle is this: geography is a financial decision. Where your household lives is one of the biggest financial choices you'll ever make, and most people never give it the financial weight it deserves. A family that moves from Yorba Linda, California to San Antonio, Texas doesn't just solve a housing crisis. They reset their entire cost structure. They plant themselves in a market where the career they're building actually has demand and room to grow. The original poster is worried about sleeping on a couch until his 30s. I don't think that's where this ends. The zip code was the problem, not the people. If you found this helpful, share it with someone facing the same pressure. Until next time, stay profitable. Murder can drop a home's market value by 25%, sometimes more. For people priced out of home ownership entirely, that discount isn't just a dark curiosity. It might be the only realistic path to building equity. And whether the math actually supports it is not the answer most people expect. Hey Profiteer, Eric here. Welcome back to Real Money Stories. Today we're getting into stigmatized properties, state disclosure laws, and what the purchase math actually looks like. This one comes from the Poverty Finance subreddit. Let me set the scene quickly. The original poster is watching news coverage of what they describe as family annihilators, murder, suicides, and violent home invasions. And they're wondering what happens to those houses afterward. It's a dark question on its face, but underneath it is a genuinely practical one. Here's the situation. Let me read it to you in their own words. When I watch the news of family annihilators, I murder suicide, or horrific break-ins where all the residents were butchered, I sometimes wonder what happens to the houses where the victims used to live. If they are not demolished, they will go for sale. I read that in some states, the realtors have to disclose that a murder took place. Would you live a house like that if the price was 10% below market? 50%? Okay, first thing I want to say, reading this. The original poster is on the Poverty Finance subreddit. That context is everything. This isn't an armchair hypothetical from someone casually browsing a hot market. This is the Poverty Finance subreddit. For that person, a 20 or 50% discount on housing isn't a thought experiment. It's the difference between owning something and not. I've been writing about personal finance for over a decade, and the questions that look unusual from the outside are almost always the practical ones inside these communities. People ask about things when they're actually considering them. So let's take this seriously and walk through what the numbers actually look like. Here's what's actually going on. The real estate industry has a name for these properties. They're called stigmatized properties, and the discount is real and documented. Academic research finds that homes where a homicide occurred typically sell for 10 to 25% below comparable properties in the same area. Not usually 50%, but significant. In a $400,000 market, 25% off is $100,000. That's real money for anyone, but especially for someone in the Poverty Finance subreddit. This is the stigmatized property discount, and the mechanism is simple. The buyer pool shrinks because most people won't consider these properties. Fewer buyers means more negotiating leverage for the ones who will. That's it. supply and demand operating on a filtered market. But here's what most people miss about the discount. It isn't permanent. Researchers have documented what they call the fading stigma effect. Over time, years, and sometimes decades, the price penalty shrinks. Neighborhoods change, memories fade, new owners build new histories in the space. A house where something terrible happened last month and a house where the same thing happened in 2009 are not the same financial situation. The further you get from the event in time, the closer the property trades to normal market value. And that's actually important for the investment thesis. If you buy a stigmatized property at a 20% discount and hold it for 10 or 15 years while the stigma fades, your equity recovery on top of normal appreciation could be substantial. That's a real trade. Some buyers explicitly pursue these properties. It's not a fringe idea? Now, here's where it stops being textbook. The original poster mentioned that some states require disclosure of a murder. That's true. But some states is doing a lot of work in that sentence. California requires sellers to disclose any death in the home within the previous 3 years. A handful of other states have similar requirements. But in many states, no mandatory disclosure exists. Services like diedinhouse.com exist specifically for this. You enter an address and see reported deaths at that property. A careful buyer can find this information. Most buyers never look, which means in non-disclosure states especially, these properties can move without the price fully reflecting their history if the buyer pool simply doesn't know. Here's why that matters financially. If you do your research and find information that most of the market hasn't found, you may be able to buy ahead of the full discount being priced in. That's how value gets captured on assets most people overlook. But there's a wrinkle most people miss. The resale liquidity problem. When you eventually sell the property, you become the one disclosing its history to your buyer pool. In disclosure states, you're legally required to tell them. In non-disclosure states, the next buyer can run the same search you did. Either way, you're now on the other side of that compressed demand. The discount you captured coming in may need to be passed along when you sell. The investment math shifts dramatically depending on your time horizon. Long hold, 10 to 20 years, and the fading stigma effect may have done most of its work by the time you sell. A short hold, 2 or 3 years, and you're potentially offering your next buyer the same discount you captured. The long-term buyer has a real structural advantage here. The short-term seller carries real risk. Before I go further, a quick reminder. This episode is intended for entertainment and education purposes only and should not be considered financial or legal advice. Please talk to a qualified financial advisor and a real estate attorney familiar with the laws in your specific state before making a decision like this. Back to the original poster's actual question. 10% or 50%? 10% is close to the lower end of what the research shows for stigmatized properties. You're capturing something real, but the resale risk may eat a chunk of that upside depending on your timeline. The math works best in expensive markets where 10% represents a large number of actual dollars, or if you're planning to stay a long time. 50% is a different conversation. At that level, either the event was extremely recent and high profile, or other problems are layered on top of the stigma. A stigmatized property with significant deferred maintenance isn't just a discount opportunity. It's a compounded risk. Get a thorough inspection, then get another one from a different inspector. Here's what I'd actually want to know in the original poster's shoes. 4 questions. 1. How long do I plan to stay? The longer the hold, the harder the fading stigma effect works in your favor. 2. What are the disclosure laws in this state? Understand what you'll be required to tell future buyers when the time comes. 3. Is the stigma the only issue? Or are there structural problems, deferred maintenance code violations sitting underneath the discount? And 4. What does this actually do for my monthly cash flow? If a 20% discount drops the mortgage payment by $500 a month, that's money you could put toward an emergency fund, toward retirement savings, toward any number of things you currently can't afford. Not capturing that discount carries its own opportunity cost. There's also a psychological dimension here that's yours alone to assess. Some people genuinely wouldn't be bothered by a home's history after enough time has passed. Others would find it impossible to get comfortable no matter the discount or the years. Neither response is wrong, but be honest with yourself before you close. Discomfort that doesn't fade is a cost. It just doesn't show up on a balance sheet. The original poster asked their question from the Poverty Finance subreddit, and that specific detail is the whole point. For someone who's been priced out of the housing market, a stigmatized property discount is a genuine path worth understanding, not something to dismiss. The specific question was about 10% and 50% discounts on properties with difficult histories, but the principle reaches further than that. Anytime the market assigns a penalty for something other than the physical structure itself, a buyer who can separate the emotional from the financial has a potential opportunity, provided they understand the holding period, the resale dynamics, and the full history that comes with the house. The house doesn't know what happened in it. Whether you can say the same is the real question to answer. If you found this helpful, share it with someone dealing with the same thing. Until next time, stay profitable. $13,518 across 5 credit cards. Interest rates above 28%, and out of a $180 minimum payment, only $30 is actually touching the debt. The rest, straight to interest. This person has been in survival mode since they were 17, and they're asking a question that hits harder than the numbers do. Profiteer Eric here. Welcome back to Real Money Stories. Today's episode comes from the Debt Advice subreddit, and it's one of those posts that stopped me mid-scroll. Someone carrying debt they never had a chance to understand, asking for help they never had anyone to give. Here's the situation: a 30-year-old working 2 jobs, 5 credit cards, over $13,000 in debt, interest rates north of 28%, and no family to turn to for guidance. Let me read it to you in their own words. Hi guys. To keep a long story short, my parents passed away when I was 17 years old, and since then I've kind of just been in survival mode, opened some credit cards to help get myself a phone and whatnot, but I was in the dark about my finances and debt info as I've had nobody to ask or help me. My question is, if I can only make the minimum payments on all 5 credit cards monthly, how will I ever pay them off? I don't spend anything on them anymore. The interest on all my cards is very high. Example: minimum payment will be $180, and then interest for that month will be $150. So I'm only paying like $30 a month. That's actually going towards the debt, and the rest all goes to interest. I feel like I'm working my butt off, and I don't get to see any of that money. I just keep getting deeper and deeper in debt due to interest. I've never missed a payment. I just can't pay more than the minimum. Yes, I know I made poor choices when I was younger, and now at 30 years old I want to settle down and have a family, and I can't do that with absolutely no money in my bank account. My $600 a week between both jobs' paychecks are going straight to interest. I don't even get to pay for food or gas. I have nothing extra to spend. I just need some advice, and I have nobody who knows anything about this type of stuff to help me. I have 2 Capital One cards, 1 Care Credit, 2 Avant, and 1 Credit Bank. The interest is above 28% for almost all of them. Capital One is what's affecting me the most. I looked into balance transfers, but again, I don't know much, and Capital One shows that if I do a transfer, I will still have the same 28% interest rate. So what do I do? Personal loan, bankruptcy, debt relief program. I just got a car in November that's essential for my work, so I can't lose it. There is just so many different things I'm reading online, and I want to make sure I go the best route. Okay, first thing I want to say reading this person did not make poor choices. They lost both parents at 17 and had to figure out how to survive with 0 financial education and 0 safety net. Opening a credit card to get a phone so you can function in the world? That's not a poor choice. That's a kid doing what they had to do. And the fact that they've never missed a single payment while working 2 jobs tells me everything I need to know about their character. I've been writing about money for over a decade and covered hundreds of questions like this one. The pattern I keep seeing: people blaming themselves for a system designed to keep them paying interest forever. 28% APR on a credit card isn't an accident. It's a business model, and when you're only knocking $30 a month off the principal, that math is working exactly the way the card issuer wants it to. So let's talk about what I'd probably do in their shoes. And I want to break this into a few clear steps because the original poster said they're reading a lot of conflicting stuff online, and I get that. Too many options can feel the same as no options. Step 1, I'd call it the interest rate reality check. Let's do the math on where things stand because the numbers actually matter here. $13,518 at roughly 28% APR. That means this debt is generating about $315 a month in interest alone. If the original poster is paying minimum payments that barely cover interest, this debt isn't shrinking. It's growing. At minimum payments only, a balance like this could take over 20 years to pay off and cost more in interest than the original debt. That's not an exaggeration. That's just how compound interest works against you at 28%. Step 2, the debt avalanche method. This is the mathematically optimal way to pay down multiple debts. Here's how it works. You line up all 5 cards by interest rate, highest to lowest. You pay the minimum on every card except the one with the highest rate. Every extra dollar goes to that top card. Once it's dead, you roll that payment into the next highest rate card. And here's why it works. By attacking the highest interest rate first, you're reducing the amount of money the debt generates each month. You're shrinking the machine that's eating your paycheck. Now, I also like knocking out the smallest balance first if one of those cards has, say, 300 or 500 bucks on it. Pay that off in a month or two, get the win, feel the momentum, then go back to the avalanche. Personal finance should be fun, or at least not soul-crushing, and small wins keep you going. But here's the thing that the original poster said that changes everything. They said they can't pay more than the minimum. Their $600 a week is going straight to bills. They can't even cover food or gas. So the avalanche method only works if there's extra money to throw at debt. And right now there isn't, which means the real first move isn't a debt strategy at all. Step 3, and this is the one most people skip. I'd call it the income and expense audit. Before touching the debt plan, I'd want the original poster to do one thing this week. Write down every dollar coming in and every dollar going out for the last 30 days. Every subscription, every payment, every fee. Use a free tool like Monarch or Wymaba's free trial to see it laid out. Here's why. $600 a week is about $2,600 a month. $13,000 in debt with minimum payments probably totaling somewhere around $400 to $500 a month depending on the cards. That should leave room for food and gas. If it doesn't, something else is eating the budget. Car payment, insurance, a subscription stack, overdraft fees. I don't know what it is, but something in the expenses needs to come into focus. Cut recurring costs first. That's the lowest effort, highest impact move. Cancel what you don't use. Call your insurance company and ask for a lower rate. Switch phone plans. These sound small, but I've seen people find $200, $300 a month hiding in autopay charges they forgot about. That's $200 that could go straight to the highest interest card. Now, the original poster asked about some specific options, and I want to address each one honestly. Balance transfers. The original poster looked into this and saw that Capital One was still showing 28%. That's because a balance transfer to the same issuer usually doesn't get a promotional rate. That's not how it works. A balance transfer only helps if you open a new card from a different issuer that offers a 0% APR for 12 to 21 months. With the original poster's credit history of never missing a payment, they might qualify for one. But heads up, there's usually a 3 to 5% transfer fee, and you have to pay off the transferred balance before the promo period ends, or you're right back where you started. So it can work, but only with a clear payoff timeline. Personal loan. This is actually worth looking into. It's called debt consolidation, and the idea is simple. You take out one personal loan at a lower interest rate, use it to pay off all 5 cards, and now you have one fixed monthly payment instead of 5. If the original poster can get a personal loan at, say, 12 to 15% instead of 28, the interest savings are massive. On $13,000, dropping from 28 to 14% saves roughly $150 a month in interest. That's real money. Credit unions are often the best place to look for these. They tend to offer lower rates than the big banks, especially for people with imperfect credit. Bankruptcy, I'd put this last on the list, not first. Chapter 7 bankruptcy could wipe out the credit card debt, and the original poster's car might be protected depending on the equity and their state's exemption laws. But bankruptcy stays on your credit report for 7 to 10 years, and it makes a lot of things harder. Renting an apartment, getting approved for a mortgage later, sometimes even job applications. For $13,000 in debt, it's a big hammer for a problem that has other solutions. I'm not saying never, I'm saying explore every other option first. Just a friendly reminder that this episode is intended for entertainment and education purposes only and should not be considered financial or legal advice. Talk to a qualified financial advisor about your specific situation, and if bankruptcy is on the table, a nonprofit credit counselor through the NFCC, the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, can help for free or very low cost. Not one of those debt relief companies running ads online, a legit nonprofit. Debt relief programs. The original poster mentioned these, and I want to be careful here. There are legitimate nonprofit credit counseling agencies that can negotiate lower interest rates with your creditors and set up what's called a debt management plan, or DMP. These can drop your rates to single digits and give you one monthly payment. That's worth exploring. But there are also for-profit debt settlement companies that charge huge fees, tell you to stop paying your cards, and trash your credit in the process. Stay away from anyone who charges upfront fees or tells you to stop making payments. You know the neighbor who looks like they've got it all together? They probably have $10,000 in credit card debt and are paying a debt settlement company to make it worse. So here's what I'd actually do in order if I were the original poster. 1. Run the expense audit this week. Find the hidden dollars. 2. Call a nonprofit credit counselor through nfcc.org. It's free. They'll look at everything and tell you what options fit your situation. 3. Ask the counselor about a debt management plan. If the rates drop, the math changes completely. 4. If a DMP doesn't work, explore a personal loan from a credit union. 5. Consider a balance transfer card from a different issuer, only if you can commit to paying it off in the promo window. Bankruptcy is the last resort, not the first call. And one more thing. The original poster said their earning potential is $600 a week across 2 jobs. Even an extra $100 or $2 a month changes the math on that avalanche. You don't need a massive raise. You need one new income stream. If you can pick up a small side gig, freelance work, or sell things you don't need, that's extra cash. Even an extra $100 a month goes straight to the highest interest card. That's when the avalanche starts working. It always starts with the first dollar. 15 minutes a day is enough to start looking into what skills you already have that someone will pay for. The specific question here was about $13,518 across 5 credit cards at 28%. But the principle underneath it applies whether you owe $5,000 or $50,000. When most of your payment is going to interest, the problem isn't discipline. It's the interest rate. Change the rate, and the same dollars you're already paying start actually reducing the debt. The original poster isn't bad with money. They've been running uphill in a headwind since they were 17, and they're still standing. That counts for a lot. If you found this helpful, share it with someone dealing with the same thing. Until next time, stay profitable. An 18-year-old watching his mother spiral, schizophrenic episodes, 20 years out of the workforce, credit card debt piling up, and a marriage on the edge of collapse. He went to strangers on the internet and asked how she could possibly survive on her own. 6 months later, she's voluntarily clocking 16-hour shifts and wiped out every dollar of that debt. The reason why is not what you'd expect. Profiteer Eric here. Welcome back to Real Money Stories. Today we're in the Poverty Finance subreddit, and this one is an update post from an 18-year-old who came back to share what happened after the community helped him figure out a path forward for his mother. A little background before I read it. 6 months ago, the original poster, 18 at the time, came online with a genuinely hard question. His mother, 50 years old, was experiencing schizophrenic episodes, hadn't held a job in 20 years, had a spending problem driving up credit card debt, and was refusing therapy. His dad was done with the marriage. The original poster wanted to know how someone in her condition could survive financially if the family split apart. The community showed up, the post hit 4,000 upvotes. Then he deleted it because the DMs got overwhelming. Now he's back. Let me read it to you in their own words. Hi everyone. I doubt many of you remember this, but I made a post a while back that got around 4,000 upvotes before I deleted it due to the DMs I was receiving. You were all incredibly helpful though, so I wanted to come back with an update. To recap, I wrote about my mom's situation. She was on the verge of divorce if things didn't change, hadn't worked in 20 years, was experiencing schizophrenic episodes, had really bad spending habits, and refused to see a therapist. Overall, wasn't in the right state of mind, and my entire family just hated being around her. Even her siblings were agreeing with my father. I was basically asking how someone like her could even survive on their own if my parents split, because my dad was truly done at that point and she makes no money, and I didn't even think she was capable of keeping a job. Considering every job she has tried in the last 2 years, she's quit within 2 weeks. Here's what's happened since then. She got a call center job. I helped her find it, vetted the company to make sure it wasn't an MLM, and got her set up. It had decent base pay, but I was not expecting her to stay long. It was a start. Within a month of starting, everything turned around completely. The doom scrolling stopped sending me these obviously AI articles and videos of rant. She's calmer. She's a different person. What really blew me away is how much she's thrown herself into it. She normally works 8-hour shifts and can leave early, but she's been voluntarily clocking 10 to 16-hour days on her own because she's motivated by the commission. She's almost addicted to working at this point, something I genuinely never thought I'd say about her. On top of that, she's cleared all of her credit card debt from the spending. It's the most dramatic change I've ever witnessed in another person. I think being unemployed for so long was genuinely what was unraveling her. She just needed something to anchor her. Anyway, I know these updates don't always come back around, so I wanted to share. Thanks again to everyone who helped. Okay, I want to pause here for a second before anything else. This kid is 18 years old. He watched his family fracture in real time, kept his head, found his mom a job, vetted it to make sure it wasn't a scam, and helped her get set up. That's extraordinary. The emotional weight he was carrying here, the responsibility he took on quietly, that deserves to be named before we talk about any of the financial mechanics. I've been writing about money for over a decade, and the pattern I keep seeing, the one that most financial content gets completely wrong, is this: we treat debt, reckless spending, and financial chaos as the root cause. We hand people budgets and debt payoff plans, but often the money problems are downstream of something else entirely. Job loss, isolation, no structure, no purpose. The financial wreckage is a symptom. This post is the clearest illustration of that I've read in a long time. The credit card debt didn't disappear because someone built a payoff spreadsheet. It disappeared because the reason for the spending went away. So let's talk about what I'd actually think about if I were in this family's situation, looking forward from here. And a quick note: this episode is for education and entertainment only. None of this is financial or legal advice. For help with your specific situation, please work with a qualified fee-only fiduciary advisor. The first framework worth naming is what I'd call the purpose. First, financial reset. What happened here wasn't a budgeting fix or a debt consolidation move. It was an identity shift. This woman found a reason to get up in the morning, a structure for her days, and a feedback loop that rewarded effort with commission checks. And everything downstream of that, the spending, the doom scrolling, the emotional volatility, corrected almost on its own. That matters practically. If you're ever trying to help someone in financial trouble, the instinct is to hand them a budget. Sometimes the right first move is helping them find work. Not because income is the only answer, but because a job provides the structure that makes every other financial tool suddenly usable. The second thing on my mind is what I'd call the commission income paradox. She's working 16-hour days chasing commission. That's remarkable energy, and it's clearly working for her right now. But commission income is variable by nature. A strong month can be followed by a slow one for reasons that have nothing to do with how hard she works. But here's where it gets complicated. If her spending patterns were tied to emotional state before, and now her emotional state is partly driven by commission momentum, a slow sales month hits differently than it would for someone on a flat salary. That's not a criticism of commission work. I actually think it can be a powerful motivator for certain people, and clearly this is one of them. But the financial safeguard that matters most right now is this: live on the base pay and treat commission as savings fuel. That principle has a name. It's sometimes called the live on base, bank the rest rule, and the mechanics are simple. Whatever the guaranteed base covers rent, groceries, utilities, transportation, that's the spending money. Commission goes somewhere separate first. A high yield savings account is where I'd park it. And the goal is the 3 to 6 month emergency fund rule, 3 months of basic living expenses in a liquid account, working up towards 6. After 20 years out of the workforce, having a financial cushion before anything else is the priority. Now the credit card debt is gone, which is genuinely great news. But I'd want to know whether she closed those accounts or just paid them off, because closing a paid-off card is almost always the wrong call. Credit utilization, which is how much of your available credit limit you're actually carrying a balance on, accounts for about 30% of a FICO score. A zero balance on an open card looks excellent. A closed account shrinks your available credit and can actually drag the score down, especially if the card has a few years of history on it. If those cards are open and sitting at 0, the smart play is keeping them that way. One small recurring charge per month, an automated full payment, and you've got a credit building machine that costs nothing. The last thing I want to address, and this one is for the original poster personally, you're 18. You just carried something that would have broken most adults. My guess is your own financial foundation got set aside while all of this was happening. That's completely understandable. But here's something I'd want you to do this week. If you have any income at all, even part-time work, check whether your employer offers a retirement account with a match. If they do, contribute at least enough to get the full match. That's 100% return on day one, and no debt payoff in the world touches that. If there's no employer plan, a Roth IRA through a place like Schwab or Vanguard, funded with a simple broad index fund, is where I'd start. Even $50 a month at 18 compounds into something significant by the time you're in your 40s. You've earned the right to think about your own future now. The specific situation here is about a call center job, a cleared credit card balance, and a family that pulled back from the edge. But the universal principle is bigger than that. Financial problems often aren't the problem. They're the signal. When someone's spending is out of control or debt keeps climbing, the useful question isn't always, what's the best payoff method? Sometimes it's, what gap is the money filling? Purpose, structure, identity, a reason to show up somewhere tomorrow morning. Fix that, and the finances sometimes start fixing themselves. It always starts with the first dollar, but sometimes it starts with the first shift. If you found this helpful, share it with someone dealing with the same thing. Until next time, stay profitable. She's 19. She's got $25,000 saved, and she's asking strangers on the internet for permission to spend $4,000 of it on a Japan trip. That's not a debt story. That's not a crisis. It's something rarer on this show, a young person who did everything right and still can't quite trust herself to enjoy it. Stick around because the answer here isn't the one you'd guess. Hey Profiteer, Eric here. Welcome back to Real Money Stories. Today's post comes from the Personal Finance subreddit, and it's a good one, a teenager asking whether it's okay spending some of the money she worked so hard to save. Quick bit of context before we get into her words. This is a 19-year-old with money spread across a Roth IRA, a brokerage account, a high-yield savings account, and checking, which, for context, is a savings setup most 35-year-olds haven't built yet. Let me read it to you in their own words. I'm 19, I have give or take 25K saved, spread across Roth IRA brokerage, HISA, and checking account. I basically spend no money, saved every dollar I've earned, and am very fortunate enough to have my parents help out with all basic expenses. I know while I could afford this trip, I plan to spend around 4K if I do take the trip. I'm wondering if this is a wise decision. If I do take this trip, I will be able to keep up with my regular investments. Plus, I'm young and certainly have time to make this money back. As I feel like I can take this trip, I probably never spent this amount of money in my life and am a little nervous. I'd love your input. Okay. First thing I want to say, reading this, good for her. Genuinely, 19 years old, 25 grand saved, and the thing keeping her up at night isn't overspending, it's the opposite. That's such a rare position to be in that I almost want to just say go, have fun, you earned it, and end the episode. I've been writing about money for over a decade now, and here's a pattern I keep seeing with people who save aggressively young. The saving becomes the identity. Spending money, even money you can clearly afford, starts to feel like betrayal. That nervousness she mentions at the end, that's not a math problem. That's a mindset problem, and it's worth taking seriously because it doesn't go away on its own just because the bank balance gets bigger. So let's actually walk through this like she's sitting across from me, because I think there's real useful stuff here for anyone wondering if they're allowed to spend money they've saved. First framework, what I'd call the witch bucket rule. It's not just how much are you spending, it's which account is the money coming from. That counts. And here's why that matters more than the total. A Roth IRA and a brokerage account are money you've told to go grow for 20, 30, 40 years. Every dollar you pull out early doesn't just disappear, it disappears along with every year of compounding it would have earned. A high-yield savings account or checking balance is a completely different animal. That money isn't doing long-term work. It's sitting there, liquid, waiting for exactly this kind of decision. Based on her numbers, if that $4,000 comes out of the HYSA or checking side, she's leaving her future money completely alone. She's just spending money that was always meant to be spendable. My advice, concretely, before she books anything, she should actually total up what's sitting in HYSA and checking specifically separate from the retirement and brokerage piles, and confirm the trip fits inside that number without dipping into the growth accounts. Second framework, and this one's for the anxiety more than the math, the percentage gut check. $4,000 sounds enormous in isolation. It sounds a lot less enormous once you realize it's about 16% of $25,000. And here's the mechanism behind why that reframe actually works. Dollar amounts trigger fear because we're wired to think in absolute numbers, not proportions. But your net worth is the actual denominator that matters. Spending 16% of your savings on an experience once at 19 with no debt and parents covering your basics is not remotely the same risk as someone spending 16% of their savings while also carrying credit card balances or with no emergency cushion. Context changes everything. Now, the obvious answer here is she can afford it, so just go. And on the numbers, that's basically true. But here's where it gets a little more complicated, and it's the part most people commenting on that thread probably missed. The real question underneath her post isn't, can I afford this? She already answered that herself in the second paragraph. Yes, she can keep investing and still take the trip. The real question is whether spending on herself at all feels safe. And that's a values question, not a spreadsheet question, which brings me to the third framework, values-based spending, sometimes called guilt-free spending. The idea is simple. Once your essentials are covered, once your future, money is protected and still growing, any spending that lines up with something you genuinely value isn't wasteful. It's the entire point of having saved in the first place. And here's why that distinction matters. Money that never gets spent on anything isn't being managed well, it's just being hoarded. There's a difference. My concrete suggestion for her: name the trip in her budget. Literally create a line item called Japan, the same way she has one for her Roth contribution. That reframes it from a scary impulsive splurge into a planned intentional goal, which tends to kill the guilt almost immediately. One more piece worth naming, because she brought it up herself, the idea that she's young and has time to make the money back. That's real, and there's a name for it too. Sort of a cousin of the time value of money, your human capital. At 19, her biggest financial asset isn't the $25,000. It's the next 40 or 50 years of earning and compounding ahead of her. $4,000 spent today has decades to be rebuilt. The same decision at 55 carries very different math, because the runway to earn it back is so much shorter. That's not permission to spend recklessly forever. It's just accurate context for exactly where she is in her financial life right now. I'd also just gently say, talk to a qualified financial advisor about your own specific situation before making any big financial decision, especially once the numbers get more complicated than a straightforward trip. This episode's general principles, not personalized advice for your exact accounts. So what of all this? The specific question was about $4,000 and a trip to Japan, but the actual principle applies whether you're 19 with $25,000 saved or 45 with $250,000 saved. Money you've protected for the future, invested and left alone, is not the same money as the money you've set aside to actually live your life. Knowing the difference and being able to spend from the second pile without guilt is honestly one of the harder skills in personal finance. Way harder than the saving part for a lot of people. If you found this helpful, share it with someone dealing with the same thing. Until next time, stay profitable. $4 million. That's the number one Reddit user calculated they'd have at retirement just from putting $1,500 a month into a couple of index funds. $15,000 a month in retirement income, and they're asking the internet, is this too easy? Here's the thing, the math isn't wrong, but the assumption underneath it, that's where this gets interesting. Hey Profiteer, Eric here. Welcome back to Real Money Stories. Today's post comes from r/personalfinance, and it's one of my favorites this year because the question isn't how do I get out of debt? It's, wait, is this actually going to work? So here's the setup. This is someone still early enough in their career that retirement feels like a spreadsheet problem, not a lived in reality yet. Let me read it to you in their own words. I ran an investment calculator, and at my age, when I retire at 62, I will have around $4 million if I just save $1,500 every month and invest VOVXUS with a return of 10%. If I save $2,000 every month, I would have around $5 million at retirement age. That's without 401k and the likes. I put this in the retirement income calculator, and it comes out to around $15,000 a month. That seems really doable, and I can't imagine what I would be spending money on when I'm nearing that age to be spending more than $10,000 a month. Is there anything I'm not considering that would make this a low amount to retire on? Eat it, I didn't mean cheap, I meant simple, sorry! Okay, first thing I want to say reading this, I love this question, genuinely. Most of the posts I read in this community are triage. Somebody's underwater, somebody's panicking, somebody needs a plan yesterday. This one's different. This is someone doing the math early and doing it right, at least on the surface, and just double checking their own work before they bet 30 or 40 years on this plan. That instinct, the wait, is this too good? Instinct is honestly rarer than most people expect. Most people don't run the numbers. I've been writing about money for over a decade now, and here's the pattern I keep seeing with these kinds of questions. The calculator isn't lying. The math checks out. What's missing isn't a number, it's a handful of assumptions that a retirement calculator just doesn't think to ask. So let's walk through what's actually missing. The first one is what I'd call the real return problem. And here's why it matters. 10% is a real, historically grounded average for a stock-heavy portfolio like the ones the poster mentioned. But that 10% is a nominal number. It doesn't account for inflation. Strip out roughly 3% average inflation, and you're closer to a 7% real return. Over 30 plus years, that gap compounds into a massive difference in what your money is actually worth. $4 million sounds enormous today. $4 million 35 years from now, after inflation quietly eats a third to half of its purchasing power, buys a lot less than the spreadsheet implies. The next step here is simple. Rerun the calculator using a real inflation-adjusted return somewhere in the 6 to 7% range, not 10. That alone changes the picture. The second thing is the tax drag problem, and this is the one I think gets missed the most in this specific post. The original poster specifically said this plan is without a 401k or the likes, meaning this is a plain taxable brokerage account. And here's why that's a bigger deal than it sounds. Every year those index funds pay dividends, you owe tax on them, even if you never sell a share. And when you finally do start withdrawing that $15,000 a month, a chunk of every withdrawal is a taxable capital gain. Compare that to a 401k or a Roth IRA, where growth is either tax deferred or, in the Roth's case, completely tax-free on withdrawal. This is the idea of tax diversification, spreading your savings across accounts with different tax treatment, and it's not just a nice to have. It changes your real spendable number, potentially by tens of thousands of dollars a year. The practical next step: max out any employer match first. That's free money, then add a Roth IRA or Roth 401k alongside the brokerage account rather than swapping one for the other. Now, up to this point, everything I've said is the stuff most financial articles would tell you. Run the numbers, use tax-advantaged accounts, fine. Here's where it stops being textbook. There's a wrinkle almost nobody accounts for in a simple calculator, and it's called sequence of returns risk. Here's the mechanism. That 10% or even 7% real return is an average across decades. But averages hide volatility, and volatility hits differently depending on when it happens. While you're accumulating in your 30s, 40s, even 50s, a bad market year is actually fine. You're still buying, and you're buying at a discount, but the moment you start withdrawing, a bad market in the first year or so of retirement can permanently damage the plan because you're pulling money out of a shrinking pot instead of a growing one, and there's no time left to recover before the withdrawals compound the damage. Two retirees with the identical average return over 30 years can end up in wildly different places purely based on whether the crash happened at the start or the end of their retirement. This is exactly why most professional retirement plans build in a cash or bond buffer, sometimes called a bucket strategy, so you're never forced into selling stocks at the bottom just to cover your bills that year. Third framework, and this one connects to the poster-specific question. They said they can't imagine spending more than $10,000 a month at that age. And look, I get it, that's a lot of money by today's standards, but this is the healthcare and longevity gap, and it's the thing that quietly wrecks a lot of otherwise solid plans. Medical costs, and specifically long-term care, tend to rise faster than general inflation, and they usually show up heaviest in exactly the years a retirement calculator assumes are calm and predictable, your 70s and 80s. A single extended care need can run tens of thousands of dollars a year that never shows up in the spreadsheet. The next step isn't panicking about this, it's building a specific line item for healthcare and long-term care into the plan well before you need it, whether that's through a health savings account along the way or simply padding the retirement number with a margin of safety. One more, and it's the simplest, the 4% rule, sometimes called the safe withdrawal rate. The original idea, built off decades of market data, is that you can withdraw about 4% of your portfolio in year one of retirement, adjust that dollar amount for inflation every year after, and have a high probability your money outlasts you over a 30-year retirement. Run that math against $5 million and you get $200,000 a year, which lines up closely with what the poster calculated. So on that front, honestly, they're not far off. The catch is that 4% assumes a diversified mix, not just stock index funds with zero bonds, and it assumes you're not caught in one of those bad early sequences we just covered. The rule is a starting point, not a guarantee. Clearly, I genuinely encourage anyone running numbers like these to sit down with a qualified financial advisor about their specific situation before locking in a 30-year plan around one calculator's output. These frameworks are the why, but your actual mix of accounts, timeline, and risk tolerance is personal. So here's the so what. This post was about $4 or $5 million and a 62-year-old retirement target, but the underlying lesson applies no matter what your numbers look like. A calculator that spits out one clean figure is doing nominal math on an average return in a single account type with no room for a bad sequence or a bad year. Real retirement planning means stress, testing that number against inflation, taxes, market timing, and the expenses nobody puts in a spreadsheet. Whether you're working with $1,500 a month or $15,000, the process is the same. Just a friendly reminder that this episode is intended for entertainment and education purposes only and should not be considered financial or legal advice. If you found this helpful, share it with someone dealing with the same thing. Until next time, stay profitable. Old beater drives in traffic, brakes gone. $6,300 in the bank, zero debt, one paycheck sitting in a trailer home outside Tucson. Comfy poor, that's what she calls it. And whether that phrase describes financial security or something a lot more fragile is not as obvious as it sounds. Hey Profiteer, Eric here. Welcome back to Real Money Stories. Today's post comes from the Poverty Finance subreddit, and it's less a question than a confession, someone trying to figure out if the life she's built actually counts as making it. Quick framing detail, before we get into it, this isn't someone in crisis. No debt, 6 months of expenses saved, bills paid on time. That's rarer than you'd think. Let me read it to you in their own words. Like, yes, I live in a trailer home with my BFN sister, and we can't afford anything fancy, but all the bills are always paid on time, we don't have any debt, and even if we all lost our jobs right at this moment, we'd still be okay for another 6 months at least, since our expenses are low. Certain things happen that still remind me that we're poor, though. I drive an old beater. Its brakes went out the other day while I was driving, which was really scary, but thankfully my BF used to be a mechanic and is able to take care of it. No retirement, and the only thing we can justify splurging on is food. For quality fresh groceries, I mainly cook at home. I rarely buy new clothes. I know we could technically spend our savings on nicer cars or a nicer home, although I don't know if I really want to, since it would put us in a pretty precarious position. I do feel grateful for my boyfriend, as he is old poor, so he knows how to do a lot of things to save us money. We also don't plan on having any children, which, when looking at some of our neighbors, might be the only thing keeping us from abject poverty. A lot of our neighbors have multiple children, and many of them are single parents as well. Not to shame them, but it's objectively harder to support multiple dependents on a single income. Maybe this is the new American middle class, as everything is so much more expensive nowadays. Sometimes I look on social media and wish things were better, but I'm just trying to have a more positive outlook on my own life. I'm living a simple life, I don't feel stressed often, and I have lots of time for hobbies, hanging out with my sister, and just taking time to smell the flowers I know. Okay, first thing I want to say reading this, she's doing better than she thinks she is, genuinely. There's almost a apology running under the whole post, like she needs permission to call this okay. She doesn't. 6 months of runway with no debt puts her ahead of a huge share of households earning 3 times what she probably makes. I've been writing about money for over a decade now, and the thing most articles get wrong about situations like this is they treat poor as one number, income, instead of the actual thing that determines your stress level, which is the gap between what you owe and what you've got saved. She's got a wide, healthy gap. That's not poverty behavior. That's discipline most high earners never develop. So let's talk about what I'd probably do in her shoes, because there are a couple of things worth naming here and a couple of blind spots worth flagging gently. First, framework the 3 to 6 month emergency fund rule. She's already living it, which is rare enough to call out on its own. The rule exists because job loss is unpredictable, but expenses aren't, and the number one reason people end up in high interest debt isn't overspending, it's an emergency with no cash behind it. And here's why: 6 months specifically, and not 3, with 3 people's incomes and expenses tied together in one household. A job loss for any one of them creates a ripple, so the extra cushion buys real negotiating room. Concrete next step for her: keep that fund in a high yield savings account, not a checking account earning nothing, so it's working quietly in the background instead of just sitting idle. Second framework, and this is the one I'd actually lead with if she asked me directly: retirement contributions, even small ones, using the power of compound growth. She said flat out, no retirement. That's the one real structural risk in this whole story. And here's the mechanism: money invested at 20, 5 has 40 years to grow. Money invested at 40, 5 has 20. Same dollar, wildly different outcome, purely because of time in the market. If either she or her boyfriend has access to an employer 401k match, that's the first move, because turning down a match is turning down free money before a single dollar of growth even happens. If there's no employer plan, a Roth IRA works the same way and takes maybe 20 minutes to open. Now, here's where it gets a little more complicated than just start saving for retirement. Because the obvious answer, redirect some of that fat emergency fund into investments, is actually wrong for her, at least right now. Here's why. She's already told us her income and expenses are low, and low income, low margin households are exactly the households where an emergency fund isn't a nice to have. It's the only thing standing between a car repair and a credit card balance that snowballs. moving that safety net into the market before there's room in the budget for new contributions on top of it would be trading real, present-day security for theoretical future growth. Wrong trade, wrong order. The move isn't either, or it's sequencing, protect the fund first, then find even $25 or $50 a month that isn't touching it. Third thing, smaller but worth naming because it's already showing up in her post, the car. A beater with brake failure is a 5-alarm fire that already happened once and could happen again. I wouldn't tell her to run out and finance something nicer. That cuts against everything she's built. But I would suggest a small, separate sinking fund just for vehicle repairs, funded automatically before it's needed. That way the next mechanical surprise doesn't have to come out of the 6-month cushion she's worked hard building. And her boyfriend's mechanic background won't need to bail her out every single time. Last piece, and this is more mindset than mechanism, the comparison with her neighbors and with social media. She mentions it almost in passing, but comparing your finances against other people's Instagram is close to useless. You're comparing your real numbers against someone else's highlight reel, usually one built on debt you can't see. The 50-30-20 budget framework, needs, wants, savings is a decent gut check here, not because she needs an overhaul, but because seeing her own numbers on paper in those 3 buckets would probably show her she's already closer to wants, flexibility than she thinks. Just a friendly reminder that this episode is intended for entertainment and education purposes only and should not be considered financial or legal advice. Everyone's situation is different, and it's worth talking to a qualified financial advisor about your specific numbers before making any big moves. So here's the zoom out. The specific numbers in this post were about 1 household, 1 used car, 1 6-month cushion. But the principle underneath it applies no matter what your income looks like. Net worth isn't your income, and it isn't your zip code either. It's the distance between what you owe and what you've saved, and how deliberately you protect that gap. She's protecting hers better than most people 3 times her income ever will. If you found this helpful, share it with someone dealing with the same thing. Until next time, stay profitable.